Shock horror. What a surprise. If you've been following Brexit as long as we have on this channel, you already know this. This shouldn't be coming as a surprise to you. But of course, what was happening every single time we were coming up to a potential deadline and the government had to move it forward and they had to move it forward again and they had to move it forward again. What were businesses most worried about? They were worried about this deregulation or even the divergence that the UK intended to take. Because if you're a business, you want surety. And most businesses out there actually pay quite a lot of money to companies who basically their jobs are, and you'll find this in a lot of countries, just to sit and watch Parliament. That's their job. They sit and they go to these select committees and they just sit and they watch. For no other reason that they want to make sure that if anything is happening or a law or a new regulation is coming in that might affect their industry, that they can know and at least plan for it so that it's not a sudden surprise. Oh my God, this law passed and we've got, a year. Normally it's normally sometimes written into law, okay, companies, it's not just going to be, it's not going to change now. You've got at least, a reasonable time and reasonable adjustment period to make those changes. So that's how those work. And of course, the government was constantly changing, running around, not telling businesses what was even going on. And of course, now, as was always had been the case, businesses were always saying, do not deregulate, do not diverge, because these standards will make it even harder for us to trade with the EU. And especially for businesses up in the north, which we've said many, many times, if you are like a business that is sort of up in York, Newcastle, Manchester, you are more likely to be on the phone to someone in Europe than you are the rest of the world. In fact, most of your customer base is probably going to be in Europe. So certainly a lot of people and a lot of businesses in the north do not want to deregulate or even diverge from EU laws. And now, of course, there is a big, at least there seems to be an increasing push, which is a good thing. We want to see this increasing push by UK businesses not to deregulate and not to diverge. And it will not be too long, I think, before we start to see some law that get passed into sort of Parliament, or at least some form of regulation to keep us in sync with EU law. I'm waiting for when that starts to happen. But yeah, I'm looking forward to see how the Brexiteers react to that. Because that's going to be spicy. But anyway, we're going to go diving into this because obviously it's really important to see what business reaction really is to this, because they are certainly going to be a very big driving force into help us getting back into the EU. So, as always, before we do go jumping into this, please do remember to hit that like, share, and subscribe button. And of course, down below, there are links to my Patreon page and a rotation link called Buy Me Coffee, where you can buy me coffee. And as always, thank you very much to all those people who do help and support the channel. Like I say, Patreon, Buy Me Coffee, YouTube thank you button, and of course the Pony Club as well down below. So, as always, thank you very much to everyone who does support the channel that way. And over we go to this. This comes from the New Statesman, the title of "Most UK businesses see no benefit in post-Brexit deregulation." Most businesses have no interest or understanding of the government's plans for post-Brexit deregulation. What a surprise. What a surprise. Because the government has not put out a serious plan at all. It is kind of shocking that this would have, and this does have big, serious ramifications. The EU revocation bill, that's going to have big and serious ramifications in this. And it's already been amended the heck out of. Whether or not this still continues to go through Parliament, we don't know. But it does certainly seem like it's continuing for the moment. But anyway, back to it. So, and the majority of companies could not name a single EU law that they would change or remove to become more profitable. And according to the findings shared exclusively with the New Statesman by the British Chamber of Commerce. The argument that EU laws were limiting UK small businesses' potential for growth was a central point to the Brexit campaign. And Vote Leave claimed that EU regulations cost for small firms over £600 million every week. And a letter signed by Michael Gove, Boris Johnson, and the peer Gelder Stewart stated that by a 2-to-1, SMEs, that's small and medium-sized enterprises, think that EU is bad for their business. 6 years on, British companies are now beset by spiraling inflation, a fiercely competitive labour market, and an end of energy price support from April. The removal of EU regulations promised by Liz Truss and pursued by the government through the retained EU law, revocation and reform bill is of relatively little concern. In a new survey of over 938 businesses made up largely of SMEs and therefore representative of the UK economy, just 14% are again specified an EU regulation that they would remove. 58% of firms had no preference over the amendment or removal of any EU regulation. Half said that deregulation is either a low priority or no priority at all. And although Britain has officially left the EU almost 3 years ago, removing EU regulations from law has proved difficult. And until recently, it was thought that at least 2,400 laws had originated in the EU. But of course, it's now close to something like 4,000, maybe like 4,200, I think, if you count them all up. But back to it. Covering everything from fishing to health and safety that are still on the UK statute book. But early last month, research by the National Archives identified another 1,400, bringing the total up to 3,800. And a lot of our employment and equality laws are drawn on EU law, said Lizzie Barnes, the Professor of Labour Law at Queen's Mary University, London. But they are so interconnected at this point because the UK didn't just take things and plonk them in, it often built on them, developed them, took them further, and in lots of areas, it's even hard to work out what the EU bit is. You can see just why this is so deadly. And we've talked about this before, why this bill is so bad. If you did this, you could rip massive, like black holes into UK law. Because the EU law is, as was said there, is just so interconnected, so intertwined, so much that we've built on and developed that you cannot actually say what the EU bit is. The retained EU law bill, introduced by Jacob Rees-Mogg as part of the Truss's government promise to remove EU law, was designed to, quote, sunset all remaining EU laws in one go, causing them automatically to expire at the end of 2023. But 2 months after it was introduced, the bill has begun to unravel. In October, Rishi Sunak, whose prime ministerial campaign had included plans for a, quote, Brexit delivery unit, was said to be still deciding whether or not to press ahead with it. And last week, an impact assessment by the government's Regulatory Policy Committee warned that it was not fit for purpose. 2 days later, a letter signed by over 13 businesses organizations, including the Institute for Directors, Trade Union Congress, the Chartered Institute for Personal Development, urged the government to scrap the bill. So hopefully this will get scrapped completely. Like I say, as always at this point, I would ask you, if you haven't done so yet and you live in the UK, please do write to your MP, email them if you want to do it sort of a bit quicker. It's very easy to do, very easy to find out who your MP is. Just type into Google, who's my MP? You can find out very easily, very quickly. And like I say, on there, it will give you an email address for them and even a postal address to write to them as well. So please go do that if you haven't done so already. But back to it. So just how little interest businesses have is revealed by the British Chamber of Commerce survey, which found that just 4% of British companies claim a comprehensive understanding of the changes the bill proposes. Almost 3/4 say they didn't know any details or were unaware of it at all. So think about that. There are businesses out there that just aren't even aware of what was going on. Yeah, that like I say, this bill, if it ever passes, it's going to cause so many problems, so many problems. But anyway, back to it. And yet, the British Chamber of Commerce say that if the bill is introduced into law without careful consideration, it could profoundly impact the way small firms do business. The body and head of trade policy said that businesses did not ask for this bill and they are not clamoring for a bonfire of regulations for the sake of it. While removing barriers to SMEs and growth would be welcomed, any proposals to either amend or repeal thousands of pieces of EU law must be carefully examined and should not be rushed. That's why the deadline on this bill must be pushed back to the end of 2026 to give everyone more time for this process to be consulted properly. Safeguards for businesses are also required, particularly for exporters for those trading within the UK, so that additional barriers to doing businesses are not unwittingly created. And those are the two key problems there. So first of all, they do not want to push this deadline back to 2026 because it is very, very likely that the Tories are not going to be in power and they are not going to have a sizable majority. So if there is a Labour government that, as we have seen, wants closer alignment with the EU, then it is very likely they will just either just say, yeah, we're not continuing it, it's dead, or they will vote to just say, we're not having this bill anymore, which is very, very likely. It is very, very likely that is what will happen. So they are desperate not to have that extended deadline because the Tories know they are not going to be in power by 2026. They know that. And then, of course, that is the other big one of it. If you pull this in, if you do this bill, it will create huge new barriers to doing trade for SMEs. Because at that point, the UK has diverged, which also brings in the provision of the level playing field, which was in the EU withdrawal bill. So that is going to cause huge problems for British businesses. But anyway, back to it. So around 20% of businesses were keen to remove rules governing employment and the environment. But many of the regulations were either specific to the UK or a direct result of Brexit itself. 19% wanted to scrap planning regulations, which have always been decided by the UK government, while proposed by the UK Conformed Assessment, that's the UK CE mark, which will be introduced as a result of Brexit, and the IR35, which is a British regulation. Both came under fire. So, shock horror, businesses aren't annoyed at the EU, they are annoyed at the British government. So, you go back to the beginning of this article, they said, oh, yeah, most SMEs want to get rid of all this EU stuff. It's causing them thousands of pounds. Well, it turns out, once again, that was a complete lie by the Vote Leave campaign. Shock horror, the Leave campaign lied. Say it ain't so. But earlier this year, polling by the British Chamber of Commerce found that over 71% of British exporters saw the government's trade deal with the EU as hampering growth. And the risk with the retained EU law bill is that it would introduce even more complexity and uncertainty for businesses of all kinds. In legal terms, it is extraordinary notions that will waste so much time when our legal systems is already so entangled, said Barnes. It's technically very, very difficult to untangle, and it's arbitrary. So, yeah, are we surprised by this? Absolutely not. Like I say, if you've been following this channel for any length of time, you know full well, businesses have never wanted to really diverge from EU law. They want to keep on following it. They've been very, very clear on that since the beginning. The biggest problem, you may say, was why didn't they speak out? Why haven't they, been so quiet? Well, the thing is, certainly in UK political culture, businesses have for a very, very long time always sort of kept, shall we say, politically quiet. It's just the thing that they do. And I know that's different in other countries, but then again, we've got things like, the Chamber of Commerce, the Institute of Directors, that they tend to be a bit more vocal, sort of in what they do. But even then, certainly during 2016, most businesses were very, very quiet. You had the few that were sort of pro and openly Brexit. We've talked about, I think, Brompton Bikes before, the old dairy brewery, and of course, look what happened to them. Not good at all. But yeah, this, continues on in just such strange, strange ways. And yeah, it just keeps on going more and more crazy this way. It's just, yeah. And remember, one of the big reasons why we originally joined the EU in the first place was because businesses were crying out so much to join. Sort of, at the time was the what was it now? The European market, before it became sort of the single market. Businesses were crying out to be part of that. And guess what? That is now starting to happen again. UK businesses are now starting to realize they need to have a bigger political voice. And that, to be honest, is good, because eventually that will once again push us back into being in the EU. So the fact that we are now starting to see more businesses talk openly about sort of, the government, sort of politics and what it wants, is a good thing. So we're getting there slowly but surely, but we're getting there. And like I say, it won't be long before, again, we enter back in the EU. It was always the path the UK had been sort of put on. So there you go. So as always, guys, thank you very much for watching. Please do remember to hit that like, share, and subscribe button. And of course, down below there are links to my Patreon page and one donation link called Buy Me Coffee, where you can, buy me coffee. And as always, thank you very much to all those people who do help and support the channel. And of course, thank you very much to everyone else who does help even just hit the like and share button. So as always, guys, thank you very much for watching. And of course, we'll see you all next time.